more than 3 weeks, the Iranian regime has been slaughtering demonstrators. The demonstrators want freedom and a better future. Instead, Iranian forces have been gunning them down. The regime admits that in just the last 3 weeks, 5,000 people have been killed, but that number is likely much higher. That's because the Iranian regime has ordered a near total internet blackout. It's impossible to get accurate information out of Iran with the internet down. Iranian businesses are struggling to stay afloat. Iran has severe economic problems, including a currency that has collapsed. In 1979, when the Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah, $1 US was worth 70 Iranian rials. Today, $1 US is worth about 1.1 million rials. Now, despite attempts from the regime to silence the demonstrators, late Sunday night, hackers disrupted Iranian state TV. The regime's channels played a message from the exiled Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi. The hackers also showed images of the massacres. Earlier, I spoke with the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. Nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you again.
It's been a while.
It's been a long time.
Lots going on.
Indeed.
I read your tweet today. You are being, as you always are, speaking to the Ayatollah, or are you speaking to the Iranian people, or both?
Well, this was a very clear message to the supreme leader that this genocide will never be forgotten, that it's a regime that has waged war on its own citizenry, shooting at them with assault military weapons, going to people's home and clobbering them there, shooting at people on the rooftop or chanting slogans at night. It is really a war scene, what's happening in Iran right now. And the expectation that these brave Iranians that are totally defenseless in terms of being unarmed vis-a-vis such a regime is, when is the cavalry going to show up and give us at least a fair chance to combat this regime and put an end to it? The momentum is, of course, still there, albeit that now people have to wait until the next opportunity to come to the streets. But the battle goes on, and as I said in my message, there's no turning back, and we will fight and fight until we finally prevail. And hopefully we'll get some help on our way.
Going back to 2009, people took to the streets, and many of us thought that that was the big opportunity for the regime to fall. President Obama did not step in. And now, fast forward to now, we have people taking to the streets again. People are being shot and killed, as best we can figure out from information coming out of Iran. President Trump has spoken big words, but so far, no action. Is there something you think he should do specifically?
Well, the president clearly stated that if the regime was to use violence against its own people, it will not be unanswered. That pretty much leads one to believe that what is the element that will be a necessity to come to the people's help, if that's the intent. And right now, we clearly see that the regime is using every aspect of its repressive arms, and most of the times it's the IRGC or the Ministry of Intelligence or any institution that backs the thugs that they bring in to repress people that need to be neutralized. So if there is going to be a strike, I suppose it's going to be targeting those institutions that have been directly involved in this massacre. And on top of it, you have other elements that the regime is bringing from the outside, from Afghanistan, from Lebanon, from Iraq, to do the dirty job. And that shows us that the regime is not necessarily capable of having its own manpower to do that, but those are also elements that is what the people have to counter and face. So altogether, I think what this president, based on what he said, is to show that his words is a man of his words, and contrary to what Obama didn't do, and pretty much threw the people under the bus in 2009, he's not President Obama, and in this case, he will act based on his promise. This is what everybody expects to see happen sooner rather than later, because we are holding the fort everywhere we can, but at some point the cavalry needs to arrive.
The difficulty that we in the media have, and everybody has, is that the regime has been so effective at shutting down any sort of communication in and out of Iran. So it's we're getting it, second and third hand, although this regime has a history of doing public hangings to intimidate people. I think the Ayatollah admitted that they've already killed 3,000. The numbers are bigger, but I mean, he himself says 3,000. One is too many. So that's been such a problem. Are you able to, I assume that you have a better communication channel to find out what's going on?
We managed to get some information, despite the fact that, of course, there's been a massive shutdown of the internet, even telephone lines. But information does trickle out. And for what we have gotten in the middle of all this has been flabbergasting information. I think the death toll is well over 30,000 as of now, maybe even more. And that's throughout the country. But Tehran alone counts more than 12,000, as it was reported about 3 days ago. Now, I think that Starlink has a key element to keep us connected, and Elon Musk has done his part, and we thank him for that. And eventually, once the information is back on, hopefully the media will also be able to get all the reports that have been pretty much impossible to obtain. But I'm sure you're going to get those facts very soon.
But that's too late off. I mean, that's after people have been killed, regrettably.
Well, yeah, of course, it's already done. But the whole point is exactly this is what we have to deal with. And as such, I think it's important for the whole world to realize that this is a regime that has no reservation in massacring thousands of people. It's a war. It's a war waged on the Iranian people. It's not just anymore. Some people report, well, there are protests and there's economic malaise and so on and so forth. It's beyond that. This is an actual war, and we need to win that war. It's a little bit like, when during the occupation, the French were having the resistance, and at some point, there has to be some kind of intervention to fight back and give them a chance to success. And that's how the Nazis were defeated after all. This is another case where our country has been occupied by a regime that is not even Iranian. They are anti-Iranian. It's a totally different conflict.
Are the protests slowing down? Because I know that, there was another incident, 2022, when the young woman didn't wear her hijab correctly, and she was beaten to death or killed, I forgot how, by the police, morality police. And then things died down somewhat. Is the protest, are we at a point in the protest where things are slowing down, or is it still very heated? The protesters are still taking to the street in giant numbers?
I think the momentum is still there, although you can call it a tactical retreat, so people are not massacred on the streets, not the chanting slogans at night. I called for that to basically go in other directions where we can still bring pressure on the regime. It's not just being on the street and chanting slogans that is necessary. We need to have labor strikes. We need to be able to paralyze the regime from within. These are other elements that we're working on together with the activists back home. And I think that's where the game changer would be, back to the question of if President Trump does act on his promise, how can we neutralize the forces that the regime utilizes against its own population? That will be tipping the balance in favor of the people, and then you can expect people to be back on the streets and then take over strategic entities that will lead ultimately to the regime collapse, which is, after all, what we're pushing for.
I'm old enough to remember pre-1979 Iran, when your father was the leader. You see pictures from the 70s, and they're dressed just like we are here in the United States, and they seem to be enjoying the same things that we are. Now you see pictures, and especially for women in particular. I realize the men are being either hanged in public and everything, but when you see the pictures, you really get an idea. But so many Americans are not old enough to remember what Iran used to be. And it has a rich culture in music and art and everything, and a completely different country than what we're seeing now.
Well, I'm glad you raised this, Greta, because in fact, maybe for the average American, they said, why should we get involved? Why should we be concerned about Iran? In what way does it impact us? Well, let me tell you how it impacts America. Many Americans who remember those days saw a country that was a friend of the United States, that provided its part of bringing stability to the region, a country that had cordial relationship with its neighbors, the only country in the region that had no qualms or issues with the state of Israel. All of that changed in 1979. A regime that came with the slogan of death to America, death to Israel. This is a regime that, as of yesterday, had a threat to actually threaten the American presidents as a retaliation or revenge factor. This is a country where Iranian Americans, who have been the first to come and seek refuge, and now many of them run this country, what they represent in terms of having a possibility to reconnect America to Iran. Iran, in the first 15 years, we estimate, will bring to America about $1 trillion worth of revenue just by doing business in Iran, a country that you've been deprived of having an opportunity to work with. Why? Because you have a very hostile regime. But the Iranian people are friends of America. And I tell you that in September 11th, when that terrorist attack occurred, we were the only people in the region to hold candlelight vigil that night in support and sympathy to the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attack. These are the same people on the streets today fighting for their freedom because they want to tell the world that unlike this regime, we want to be friends, we want to be partners. And this will be something that we're not sending our troops again. We'll have a reliable, viable partner that will be doing something that it is our own national security interest as well as economic interest. That's really what's at stake. You're not doing it necessarily out of compassion. You can also do it because it is in the best interest of America. And this is something that today's generation of Americans need to understand.
There's also one other thing. Besides the question of compassion and morality and the question of the economic partnership that we can have and the relationship we did have, is Iran is in this hemisphere. It has been financing Hezbollah. Hezbollah is all over Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like it's financed Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. I mean, it has not. The regime has not kept its terrible works within its own borders. It has been spreading it all over.
Exactly, and even worse than that, Greta. I was telling British officials of the mapping of all the institutions that the regime is using, again, under Ali Khamenei's leadership, that are specifically threatening British citizens via networks of so-called charity centers or educational center or what have you, sleeper cells that they have activated in Britain. The same thing exists also in the United States. Not necessarily nearby in Venezuela, but even on American soil as we speak.
Do you have any fear? I think your cousin was assassinated, and according to the State Department, there have been 360 assassinations around the world since 1979 by Iran. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor, has had threats. President Trump has had threats. Do you fear?
Greta, I've been, from day one, born in an environment where terrorism became a method of enemies, and security threats has always been, part of my political life.
Well, you were just a boy when you came here, pretty much, pretty young.
No, what I'm saying is that it's part of the job. You have to face the reality that security is a big concern, but it doesn't impact me personally as something that would deter me from doing what I have to do. When you're fighting for a just cause, you have to be able to put your life on the line, and I do. But I do it responsibly in the sense of making sure that we take all the necessary precautions. But at some point, you have to be able to understand that it's the ultimate sacrifice that you have to be prepared to do, and I am.
The Ayatollah is 86. I don't know if he's going to fall in the next weeks, days. I don't know what President Trump's going to do or not do. But eventually, age will get the best of him. It gets the best of all of us. But someone's got to lead. He's got a son who's about 56, who's as extremist as he is. Do you anticipate that you would go back and want to lead your country?
Look, the reason I am leading this movement is because my compatriots have basically called my name. They have actually, not that this is new, I've been doing this for 46 years, but specifically in the last months, it was very clear that this is the name they call. This is the person they want to step in, and I have. I'm discharging my duty to lead the transition, and my commitment is to make sure that we are moving away from this regime, which is a clerical dictatorship, towards a secular democratic future. My entire plan is to make sure that we can have a smooth transition, to address that period of transition post-regime collapse, to make sure the country is stabilized, to make sure that people are secure, to make sure that we have the maximum possible defections from the regime that can survive regime change, so long as they haven't been involved criminally and have the blood of the Iranian people on their hand. In other words, unlike what happened in post-Saddam Hussein de-Baathification, this time we're trying to include as many people as possible within the military and paramilitary forces, as well as the civil bureaucracy. All of this so we can elect a parliament that will be a constitutional assembly, if you will, to debate what is the final form that the Iranian people would like to have by means of free and fair elections. Managing this entire process is my role in this transition, and I've proposed a plan of action that has been explained quite copiously under an organization called IPP, which is Iran Prosperity Project, which is focused on the immediate future, the first 100 days, what needs to be done. This is something that basically is a scenario of how do we move from this regime and ultimately get to a final point where Iran is finally a country where we have a full-fledged secular democratic government to replace this clerical dictatorship.
Well, we've had 50 years, almost 50 years of this, so we'll see what happens, whether President Trump does anything or others do something. But obviously, a terrible situation in Iran and has been. But thank you, sir, for joining me. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you, Kata, with pleasure. Thanks for having me.
People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.